I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And I am Dr. Scott.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each week, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Today, our episode is a true crime documentary review on Menendez and Menudo, Boys Betrayed. Welcome back, everyone. We have your doc review of the month coming right up for you. How are you doing, Dr. Scott?
Good. We are relatively okay over on my side of the world with the heat wave. I know you're having to deal with a little bit worse on your side. How high was it yesterday?
It was be in the pool as much as you can high. Oh. I don't know, but... Gratefully, we have a nice place to hang out in the water. So we're doing all right.
And you have a pool that is not always in direct sunlight, which is very cool.
Correct. Yeah. Which at times I've hated because I wanted more sun later into the day, but then I see the total perk of it as well. But I'm also one that'll like move my umbrella over by the pool so I can be in the pool and have like a little corner of shade to work on. So yes, we're making it work here. So good. Well, let's do our episode recap from last week. And that was episode 148. And we finally got around to doing an episode on bad cops. So for this profession, we decided to focus on a very salacious crime when love triangles end in murder. And really we explored, whether or not police relationships are that unique or are they reflective of the issues that the civilian population faces. And we weed through all of it and cover two wild cases, one from right here in the heart of Los Angeles. Yeah. So that was a wild ride for sure. Let's talk about what we're watching, listening, reading, all of that at the top of our show. Let's see. So I just finished an audiobook. It's called From Here to Eternity, and it's by Caitlin Doughty. She is this really cool mortician that I heard interviewed on NPR. And she has a business here in Los Angeles where she's just kind of progressive and trying to break through the glass ceiling of what has been a very male-dominated industry that has done the same thing the same way forever. Yeah. She is fascinating. She's just like a really cool millennial who has taken this business and tried to do it the way that she wants to do it and honor families in really cool, special ways. Nothing too like out there or anything, but she's just saying it doesn't have to be done the way it's always been done. But she wrote this book essentially traveling the world, exploring different death rituals. And it's fascinating. It had me thinking about, of course, like what I want to happen with my body.
Oh, yeah.
Such cool considerations. And I think just kind of reflecting on how we think of death here in the United States and how pretty unique it is that we just like it's icky. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to discuss anything. So that was interesting. I really recommend that. I'm also listening to a podcast right now. It's called Betwixt the Sheets, and it's by Kate Lister. So she's the one that wrote the book on the history of sex work that we used as our main resource when we covered that, I think in a two-parter that you and I did. But she's a Brit and she's totally hysterical, just like really snarky and funny. And this is the history, like looking back in history at sex, like, Shakespeare's sex life and what was really up with him and how he intertwined sex into his writings and his plays. And what did that mean about his own life? And it's just kind of a cool history podcast, but has this element of sex and sexuality to it. So other than that, and other than this documentary that we're watching, I watched a little bit of the American Gladiators documentary.
Oh, God. Are we doing that next? Oh my gosh.
No, we're not. But good. I had to. I watched that show so much when I was a kid and I freaking loved it. I freaking loved it. I was in love with Nitro. And it's just so funny to see like all these people now. Most of them look pretty great and hear them kind of talk about their experiences. Just, I had to.
So connection to that, one of my very good friends and who's now a retired agent from William Morris, which is now William Morris Endeavor, I believe. It's been so long since I've been in that milieu. Mark Itkin is one of the reasons that American Gladiator happened. He was the agent who put together the idea of packaging and American Gladiator really is one of the first reality series.
Yes.
Like, there was Real World, but like, here's this. And I remember, Steve somebody. What was his name? When I was working at William Morris, my agent, Polly Burrill, that I worked for, was her assistant for about 8 months, I believe. And Steve Herring? No, what's his name? Anyway, he was enormous and the sweetest guy in the world, and like 6'5" he didn't even look real. He was just like a giant. He's like, hey, why don't you come up and hang out and me and my family. We're gonna go on a motorcycle ride this weekend. I'm like, thank you, no thank you.
Not my thing.
It was very kind, but not my thing. Very sweet guy. But yeah, what a crazy doc.
Yeah.
But stuff that I'm watching.
Yes.
Something that I highly recommend, and I had no interest in seeing it at all, is a show called Jury Duty. It is a really interesting reality show populated by, I mean, the casting on this is amazing because it's like a Truman-esque. One person is not in on it. It's all a fake setup of a jury.
Right.
So they had to find people that were really not very recognizable. And for me in my casting, like everybody that's like in the cast that's over 35, I immediately recognize. It's like, I know them from this, and this. But it's hilarious. And I'm one episode away from finishing. And the lead guy who's not in on it is the sweetest, most likable, affable, kind, moral person.
So he just thinks he's on a jury.
He thinks he's actually on a jury and part of the documentary. And then James Marsden plays himself. James Marsden is like James Marsden, the actor who gets roped into jury duty. And he makes such a buffoon of himself, which is so great. Like he sends himself up. There's some great bits like where our lead character says, oh, yeah, no, I love that movie so much. I bought that. And he goes, you bought it? You didn't just rent it on DVD, on VHS? He goes, no, I have the DVD copy. He goes, oh, that's good because I get $1 for every time somebody buys that.
That's so funny.
Very funny.
Yeah. So it's not cringy like
it's not cringy about the lead character. It's cringy about everybody else. But I'll tell you, my concern is like you're on the edge of your seat. You like him so much. You think, oh my gosh, please don't let him end up being an awful person. Because there was a show years ago called Film Fakers. And I thought it was hilarious at the time because it was these really kind of, I want to be very careful about the adjective I use for the people, but they were people that were duped into thinking that they had gotten parts in low budget movies. And they weren't. They were all fake. Not nice. And some of them came off looking really bad. And now watching it with a more critical eye, in fact, I don't even think you can watch anymore. I'm just like going on my own memories. And I'm like, oh, that was cringe. And I'm not happy about it. Yeah. I don't like but there's another show I really highly am enjoying called Upload. It's a series from a couple of years ago that Dan and I, we got to pick this up and complete it. It's Robbie Amell, who's the cousin of the guy who played Green Arrow on the great Arrowverse show. But it's a really fascinating concept. Almost a little bit Black Mirror. Well, very Black Mirror, because Black Mirror has had episodes like this where if you know you're going to die or you're on the edge of death, you can completely upload your consciousness into a computer mainframe and you can live this paradise-like life. But the thing is like everything costs something. So if you're poor, you go to this lower level. And if you want to actually be able to taste food or experience things, you have to pay more. And then now in season 2, they've introduced this concept where if you are part of this mainframe, then the company that owns it is monetizing your thoughts and your dreams.
Oh, wow.
Like they'll pick out dreams and they'll like the Patreon members can basically live your sex fantasy or they can live your memory. And it's like it really takes this turn of like, ooh, that's so weird. But here's the thing, you guys, and also your image is being used for something that like you never gave permission to, which is actually happening right now in our union negotiations for actors and writers in Hollywood. This is a very salient issue where producers Guild is trying to have the right to take background actors' faces, pay them for one day's work, which is a few $100s, and then in perpetuity be able to paste their face throughout all time into background actors or AI versions of background actors, which is just so messed up. You know, we haven't really talked about it here, but I'm a member. I'm an active member of one union. I'm an inactive member of 5 other unions. Unions built this country and gave us a solid working class. And, you know, I am very, very pro union and whatever you guys can do to educate yourself on how vital the unions are for preserving the middle class. I just highly recommend people educate yourself on this. And Upload is a good show too. Also listening to, we just did a promo a couple of weeks ago. We recorded a promo for this show that I now can't stop listening to.
I told you you'd like that.
You're absolutely right. It's our Glassbox sibling, the podcast Conspirituality. I have been completely sucked in. I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredibly thoughtful explorations of the power that these cult-like conspiracy movements can hold over both seekers, people who are just interested in getting the truth, and also people who are sort of, in terms of identity, are wandering or they're lost and they're seeking meaning without like a sense of foundation in their life. And I just love the way the hosts approach everything. It's so thoughtful, and it's not like a listen in the background. You know, this is something you really, really pay attention to.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Every time I listen, I'm like, these guys are so smart. I feel so dumb listening to this.
Yeah.
But it's also, you know, it obviously overlaps with some stuff that you and I have touched on from the psychological perspective. And as things come up about cults or conspiracies and QAnon and all of that throughout the years. So I feel definitely adjacent to it, but I feel like I'm getting such an education. It's such a great little compatibility piece to us.
Well, right. I think you're hitting on something very important. I mean, I think you're probably still more aligned academically than I am. You know, we're both clinically trained.
Yeah.
We're both forensically trained, as well as other areas. At the doctoral level, you're a PhD. I'm a PsyD.
No, I'm a PsyD.
Oh, you're a PsyD? I didn't realize. Okay, you're a PsyD. But we, within the PsyD world and within the psychology paradigm, we kind of look at things through a particular lens. And what I love that these guys are doing is they're like philosophers. They're talking about this from a philosophical and phenomenological standpoint that I think is, like you said, is adjacent to ours. And anyway, highly, highly recommend. But I digress, as always. Who's surprised by me digressing? Not at all.
Not me.
Not at all. This month's documentary is Menendez and Menudo, Boys Betrayed. It's a completely salacious title. Salacious title. Cannot recommend it enough, and we'll be telling you why we feel so strongly about this as we go through today's episode. It premiered on May 2nd, 2023 on Peacock, which is the streaming service for NBC. There's no Rotten Tomato score yet because it needs more input.
And it's so new.
It's relatively new. I would encourage all of our listeners to please watch this if you can and go review. Not to say that there aren't problems with it, but it's a very, very valuable thing to watch. But we'll touch on the review things later in the episode as well.
Yes. So definitely an episode that needs a trigger warning. There is a lot of talk in this documentary about severe sexual abuse of children, although you and I are going to stay away from details as much as possible. I think there's some things to note that, you know, we'd honestly be remiss if we just tried to sugarcoat it and not mention. So, you know, there'll be a few things that we talk about today, as well as, of course, because of the Menendez case, just noting that also we'll be talking about murder perpetrated by gun violence.
I would also add to this that there is very much emphasized gaslighting, as well as emotional manipulation and the indication that abused children's parents were paid off. I just wanted to mention that as a potential trigger because that's a big deal, maybe for some of our listeners. So wanted to be careful there. But let me jump into a plot synopsis. Lyle and Eric Menendez shot and killed their parents, Jose and Kitty, on August 20th, 1989 in their Beverly Hills home. That is a fact. Prior to this documentary coming out, though, not many people that are under the age of 40 recall that there were two trials. In the first trial, the defense was able to lay out this chronic and severe history of child abuse that the brothers suffered. And the defense essentially gave a battered child's syndrome defense. It's a legitimate approach because it exists. Battered child syndrome absolutely exists.
We'll talk about the nuance and how that term is used a little bit later on.
Well, yes,
I get what you're saying.
I agree.
Top.
The use of it can be very questionable. However, some of the behaviors are certainly there. That first trial ended in a mistrial. The jury was split between murder and manslaughter. It was mainly their word against their dead parents, except for a female cousin who came forward and shared her suspicions of abuse and was told subtly by one of the brothers that there was sexual interaction with his father. So why was there a second trial at this time? Why was there such a different outcome? And one of the things that this documentary we're covering today posits is that the O.J. Simpson case lit a fire under the DA's office that resulted in a very different outcome for the brothers' hearings. Now remanded or switched from an approach of manslaughter charge that would have allowed the possibility for a 10-year sentence. In the second trial, the judge ruled that the sexual abuse evidence violence could not be mentioned at all. So the defense had to rely on verbal and psychological abuse as the main example of why the boys snapped, quote unquote. This earned them a guilty verdict and life sentences. So all of the evidence that indicated history abuse was now disallowed. And while true crime content listeners know that the general story of these trials, the further we go back in time, now 30 years, we have a bigger picture, more context, and more of a cultural understanding of the insidious nature of sexual abuse.
Yeah. So I think probably everyone comes to this with, Menendez being literally the first word in the title. Yeah. But this takes maybe a different narrative than you think it would be just even on the surface. This documentary follows the story of Roy Rosello, who's a former member of the Latin boy band Menudo, who in adulthood has been vocal about his victimization at the hands of the band's creator and manager, Eduardo Diaz, and on at least one occasion, Jose Menendez. So you see, when Menudo entered the American music market, Jose was the president of RCA Records, the label with which Menudo signs. And essentially, after Roy was offered up to Jose as a sexual gift, the deal was signed with RCA Records. So this documentary is really Roy's journey to use his victimization and his strength to find justice for himself and possibly assist the Menendez brothers' counsel in seeking a reduced prison sentence. So this really is Roy's story, and the Menendez case is almost ancillary to these new revelations about the alleged abuse by Jose Menendez against Roy, and then about the primary perpetrator that he's accusing in this documentary, Eduardo Diaz. So right off the bat, just a stylistic choice. I mean, did they really have to start with like the collect call from the correctional facility?
That's interesting that you point that out, because two of the reviews say exactly the same thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's such a true crime trope by now. I'm like, come on. But I'm thankful it just went up from there. So we learn right at the beginning that the Menendez brothers are both currently housed at Donovan State Prison in San Diego. They've been in prison for 33 years. And in 2018, they actually were reunited into the same facility. So they are both there together. We get a quick recap of the 1989 murder at the top of this documentary. So Lyle was 21 at the time. Eric was 18. They had shot Jose 5 times, point blank, one to the back of the head with a shotgun. And then their mother, Kitty, was shot 9 times, once point blank to the face. And in that first trial, Lyle essentially testifies about the abuse. They both do, but Lyle talks about how it started with him first after sports practices when he was about 6 or 7 years old. And this included, some of the escalation of behaviors that we talk about with child sexual abuse, the massaging to the fondling to performing oral sex on his father. And then Eric's abuse had a similar pattern, although they didn't really reveal their own sexual abuse to each other until much later on. And Eric's, at least, they talk about, being the younger one, his abuse continued right up until before the murders. So right as he's about 18 years old.
I'm really glad you said that last bit too, because that's pretty important to the overall paradigm of victim profile that is explored here for both Menendez and for Eduardo. But back to our timeline in the production. At this point, we meet a through character in this documentary. His name is Robert Rand. He's a journalist, and he has written a lot about this story for 30 plus years. And he has really gotten to know Eric and Lyle very well. And it's very clear he has a relationship with them. Right. He has there's a friendship. This goes beyond, creating an interview relationship. This is somebody who really believes in the context of how these crimes were committed. And I think that's pretty clear. And he is the one that really starts to dive into the Menudo connection after he learns that Jose was obsessed with Menudo during his time at RCA in the 1980s. So like I said, it's clear that Rand has developed a real relationship with both these brothers, and he continues to be invested in attempting to right this wrong from his perspective. And certainly, I'm just going to say in the documentary, I really like how they don't try and sort of minimize that. Here's somebody that is very much invested, and you understand his investment in it. So we learn that Eduardo Diaz, again, the group's manager, would swap out Menudo's members at about age 16 so that essentially the group would never age and he could continue this money-making machine. And look, in terms of business and understanding the market, that's actually pretty genius, despite the fact that he's a reprehensible person no matter what.
It's also for his own
yes, he's
benefit,
also motivated for
clearly.
himself, right? So he's understanding that this money-making machine is always going to appeal to the age range of his target audience without him or any of the production or any of the company having to deal with the real-time maturing process of his performers. So just as there's always going to be a new crop of pre and adolescent fans, he wouldn't have to worry about the performers aging out of his audience, becoming their own people. And sort of like you look at NSYNC and 98 Degrees, all of these young men were like, I don't want to be in a boy band anymore. I don't want to be part of it. I want to be a man, he's never going to have to worry about that, right? So Rand goes to Puerto Rico, where Diaz and Menudo were based out of, to interview people that had reported suspicions of Diaz molesting the boys of Menudo, constantly holding auditions, requiring that these potential new band members be dropped off at his home for the weekend to try out.
Ugh.
Immediately creepy.
Pool parties and all of that. So this, and I don't want to deviate too much because we could go into a whole rabbit hole here, but this is where it started reminding me of that documentary, An Open Secret, which was about the boys abused in Hollywood by executives in the 80s. And I remember I got a copy of that documentary and it was just absolutely jarring. I found it on YouTube. I put it in the show notes. So I think it's a pretty uncut version of that if people want to look into it. But man, I was having such similar vibes when they were just showing footage of like the boys in the pool at his house and things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So at this point, we're then introduced to another journalist, a female journalist from Puerto Rico that Rand gets connected with as he's doing his research. And her name is Neri Inclán. She has really followed the abuse allegations for years and is our connection to the main hero in this story, Roy Rosello. So when we start to hear Roy's story, we learn that he joined Menudo at age 13. He was really recruited by Diaz. Like he just sort of showed up at the studio and Diaz spots him right away and sort of plugs him in without having to audition or anything like that. And Roy says, I got caught up in his promises. He told me, you'll be rich, you'll be a star in Hollywood, you'll have fancy cars. And as a 13-year-old from pretty modest means, I mean, this was something that, he was very, very excited about. So the grooming is very textbook here and obvious straight off the bat. Diaz, there's an account of Diaz showing up to Roy's school one day and talks the principal into letting him leave with him. I mean, this is where we start to see how much power Diaz has really in the community and in the territory of Puerto Rico. So that day is where the abuse starts. He picks him up, he takes him out of school, he takes him to his home. And it's so eerie as Roy recounts how he's in a room and he hears Diaz having a conversation with Diaz's mother, whom he lives with. And she's telling him, do not do what you're going to do with that boy. Like she just so clear that she knows what he's into and what he's about to do. And sure enough, that was the first time that Roy was molested and raped by Diaz.
That's interesting because I got something just slightly different, which I think is very significant. I don't think he lived with his mom. I think he took him to his mom's house to abuse him so that it wouldn't be on his own property. I mean, it doesn't it doesn't really make any sense that a guy he's wealthy by this time. I mean, Menudo's been going on like the idea that I don't think he was living with his mom. I think he was using her house for the location.
Okay. Yeah. Or mom lived with him. I mean, I don't know the separation of it. I mean, I could imagine him taking care of his mom if he's rich, but the way I said that was definitely like he was still living in his mom's basement or something.
Yeah. And it's heartbreaking too, because you just the pressure of she knows what's happening. What kind of pressure was she under? She knew exactly what was going on.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yes.
If Roy's story is true and accurate, which it feels like it really is.
Oh yes, absolutely. So he also goes on to really just allege, kind of this gives us this broad view of like once he's in Menudo, the routine was right after the concerts, he had to share a room with Diaz 3 to 4 times a week. He was being raped by him and is telling us the extent, to which this really impacted him. Multiple suicide attempts throughout his life, drug use. And at the age of 17, he gets kicked out of the group and moves to Brazil to go on really this spiritual healing journey of his own and ends up finding religion, finding Christianity. And again, we're going to say alleged throughout this episode. Roy seems so sincere and is just he's come to this point where, yes, absolutely, it still hurts, but he has made this absolute decision to let this be his story. He's doing it on his own terms and being as transparent as possible. And he says it's not easy to recover my soul after losing it, and that he just really wants justice for all of this. So that, it's a lot, and we get more details later, but this is sort of our first introduction to Roy in episode 1.
You really get a strong sense of him having great concern for the Menendez brothers.
Yep.
And there's connections that are not tenuous. That, yeah, another sort of really disgusting and troubling reflection on Diaz is that Roy had attempted suicide several times. He had run into traffic. We don't really get information on the other attempts that he made, but each time he was brought back, he wasn't ushered out of the group for those reasons because he was still a moneymaker. So he was just beaten and raped and marginalized. Another part of this, too, that you find out in a later episode, but it's sort of in tandem with him first starting, is that he was ostracized by the other members of the group when he came in because he did not audition. And the other members by this time, they already knew what was going on, right? So they knew that probably, I'm going to make some assumptions here. I would not be surprised if that moved somebody else out of the preferred spot.
Well, it did. It ends up as later we meet the brother of a Menudo member that was supposed to get that next spot.
Right. The one who passed away that we don't know how he passed away. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's really like we learn throughout this that as accepted as Diaz's alleged behaviors were, they were even saying, oh, he and Roy are like in a relationship. Like he's Roy's favorite. That's really the picture you get.
Yeah. So they're all children. That's through a child's perspective of what's going on, which they, as adults now, have a lot more insight into. But then going on to episode 2, we're getting back and forth. It's very, very much Menudo and very little Menendez, which I don't think you're expecting when you come into watching this. But episode 2 focuses on interviews with their cousin, a woman who lives in Ventura, California. And she had testified with the concept of the self-defense in terms of the crime that occurred. Her name is Diana, and she was really like an occasional older sister to them. She comes across as very kind, sincere, and overwhelmed even to this day. There's a sense of her being very, very overwhelmed. And while she and her mom are sitting around the kitchen table talking about their memories. And this is not specifically addressed, but was very significant to me. It's not addressed in the documentary. You realize that you're listening not only to the brother's cousin, who is also their Urset's older sister, but to their aunt, the sister of the woman that they killed.
Yep.
And she's now 90 years old. And it's just fascinating to me because I'll never know what they edited out or what the direction was, but she doesn't refer to her sister, really. I just felt like I came away thinking, wow, there's a lot more there to explore. She has to have a lot of mixed feelings.
Yeah, you almost wouldn't know unless it didn't say underneath Kitty Menendez's sister. You can put 2 and 2 together, but you don't know which cousin this is.
I came away from it at the end thinking she knows a lot. She knows a lot, but the cousin really does a great job in this she has a very sort of what I would say restricted speech pattern. Like she's really considering how she's going to share this with the audience, which I have a lot of appreciation for. But they both talk about how they both witnessed and really, really vividly remembered the spark going out of the brothers' eyes. Like at this point where they weren't happy kids anymore and that they were just sort of detached and distant. And they talk about other things that they realized in hindsight. And the cousin says, it's like these puzzle pieces coming together. It's been so long, you think you've been told everything, but then more memories come up. And then they go on to discuss a series of events with Eric. And this was horrifying. It's probably one of the most horrifying things in the whole documentary series, I'd say, is that he would beg them for lemons or ketchup. And at the time, nobody understood what it was. Like, what is the deal with his need for lemons? And that he would have meltdowns. And at first it was like, why is this brat demanding lemons and ketchup? Why is he demanding it? Because at the time, neither of them understood the need, or they didn't understand that he was basically having an intense panic attack that was triggering a meltdown. And they share this moment where they both witnessed him melting down into tears, begging for a lemon. And all these years later, they realize that he was using that to get the taste of his father's semen out of his mouth. That,
Horrendous.
you know, he had, and that he would have they would be there at the house.
Yeah.
And the dad would come down and say, oh, he didn't want to eat dinner. He was not feeling well.
Right. Right.
And
like take him upstairs and then.
Right.
Yeah. Ugh. I know.
So,
and
yeah, it's
to hear these
segment.
two women just talking about this, you know, sitting around a table, and I appreciate their bravery for being able to talk about these things.
Yeah. There's also something, I mean, that was horrifying. I would say that there's something heartbreaking here that was spoken about years ago, but now you have them speaking about it as incarcerated adults, and they play audio about the contrast of most battered children will align with the parent that they feel the most safe with. So what the brothers told themselves for years was that mom doesn't know, we have to protect her from this. And then there was a moment as teenagers where they confronted their mom about the abuse, thinking that they had been protecting and hiding this from her all along, and that she shared with them that she had known about it. Like, that completely, as a clinician, I can tell you that is incredibly devastating to a person when you have a foundational core belief that is absolutely integral to your sense of safety and identity, and that is destroyed. That is a traumatic event in itself, right?
Completely imploded. Yeah.
And Eric also shared that Jose had threatened to kill him if he ever told anybody about the abuse, and he would tell him in detail how he was going to kill him.
I don't think we'll ever know, but this does make my mind sort of wander to, obviously Kitty knew. Was there any abuse that she was under as well, or threats? Obviously, she still has decisions to make as a protector and as a mom, but we also know how convoluted that can get, right? So it is, especially like, go back and with, you know, some stuff we're going to talk about here in a little bit, go back and listen to our battered women syndrome to really hear about how that usually escalates when the children are starting to be threatened by the spouse. And maybe it'll give some context to this. But just a side note, I think, you know, this was one other bad thing I have to say about the documentary is I don't think they needed to show the crime scene photos again. Like, can we just get away from that? In documentary, it didn't need it. Like, this one did not need it in any way. So I think, yeah, these are horrible humans, but also let's think about not traumatizing the audience.
I could not agree more. I mean, this is an overused word, but I was shocked. I mean, I was really shocked. I was like, thankfully, it's only 2 times. One more explicit than the other, but even so, it didn't need to be done, and it is just jarring. More so because there's a lot of true crime stuff out there that show crime scene photos, but do it in a different way with blurring. But they're not blurred, they're not obscured. I get that maybe it's important to see the significance of the wounds of the parents, and it feels manipulative. And I wanted to go, okay, why would they think that this was appropriate? It is so tonally different from everything else that they've set up.
Yeah.
And I wondered, is this a creative decision by the producers in order to try and send a message to the audience of, we're not going to take the stance of minimizing this crime? I don't know. I don't want to give them too much credit for that, but it just felt jarring and unneeded. It just didn't fit the tone of the documentary. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the alternative is obviously descriptions. You know, sometimes they have those.
Which they do.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Those drawings that are like the diagrams that a coroner might fill out, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, you don't get the red blood and the gore. I think the faces were blurred out. Like, the face was.
I don't think there was any face left.
Well,
I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to be funny. I like, both of them there were behind the head wounds, which with a shotgun would have obliterated anything.
For sure. But I think, you know, there's something about seeing a face completely disfigured that is more disturbing than anything else. And I think that part was blurred out.
Okay.
I'm not going to go back and look, but you guys let
I'm
us
not
know.
either. I mean, there's clearly there was a leg wound on Jose where, a portion of the leg is completely blown away.
Yeah. So here, let's get into just like this term battered child syndrome for a moment. And because this is where they bring it up in the documentary. So they get into this, a little bit. They talk about the results of pervasive child abuse. They talk to a psychologist, Rebecca Bailey. She's a leading family psychologist and trauma psychologist here in California. And she's brought on really to talk about trauma reactions, just kind of like, with such severe child abuse, some of the things we talk about, or any types of severe abuse, we don't know how people are going to react. There is such a wide variety of what are normal, quote unquote, normal reactions based on personality, experience, background, what have you. She's just kind of hitting that home. Just like in previous documentaries, I think they really underutilized her, as they seem to do with mental health professionals. Is that just us going like, wait, there's so much more you could get this person to give you? So I wish they had used her a little bit more. But so if you were just to Google battered child syndrome, you actually get a ton of information about children who have been chronically abused and which ends up in the homicide of the child. So in the literature, battered child syndrome means when the child is severely abused and that either, they live through that or they die, but the discovery is that a caregiver has done that. There is nothing parallel to how we extrapolate that to what we're talking about here or with battered women's syndrome, kind of making those comparisons, even though that's what we're all thinking here, right? Like this is a person that is a family member who has been so battered, abused, sexually abused, what have you, that it was part of what led up to them perpetrating this crime. So I think it's interesting that just really isn't a thing. They sort of keep referring to it as the self-defense defense. Again, whether or not, someone thinks that they're in imminent danger and then they have to sort of strike first is what we're talking about here. So in all of this, I think despite the new information and the new interest in the Menendez case, we're left with, were they truly in fear for their lives that night? Did they fear Jose and Kitty were going to kill them because they were possibly going to reveal the family secret? I mean, there's still some despite the revelations, there's still some core questions that, I don't know if they'll ever be answered. I mean, obviously we have Lyle and Eric's answer to that, but when you just have words, there's not a lot of evidence to back that up necessarily. And that's where all of this sort of comes in circumstantially, right?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt they were horrifically abused and that should have really impacted their trial. We can all agree about justice was not given to them based on the evidence that was allowed to be brought up in court. But we're still left with a lot of unanswered questions about what was transpiring that night. And like you said, was there imminent danger? And again, it's not battered woman syndrome because the paradigms are different. A spouse who experiences years of abuse is different from a child that experiences years of abuse. And we're also not seeing them as children. We're seeing them as, like I'm saying, not we, so the world is seeing them as young adults, as entitled young adults. And we're going to touch on a little bit more of that at the very end, but let's go on and get through the rest of the episode. Yeah, there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, there is. I think just going back, just psychologically, again, whether it's a wife, whether it's an adult child, there is, again, going back to trauma, there's someone's body can be in such a state of hypervigilance. And then how is that impacting their psychological lens after being in survival mode for so long? It may be skewed, it may be twisted, but of course it is. And then how does that lend to the actions? So yes. Let's get back
and then there's all these gender roles as well. So there's issues about patriarchy and, cultural ideas about marriage and power and the role of children. It's a lot more complex than any documentary has the ability to go into. And I think talks about issues that are complex that, maybe our fans, certainly people that are here interested in aspects of psychology they're going to be hungry to hear those things. But the general public, it's just too much for them.
True. All important conversations.
So Roy boy is able to track down a few of the folks who are very, very important to corroborating his accounts of Diaz's behaviors over the years. We're switching back to the Menudo narrative. Okay. So most important, I really feel like most important is Bolivar Arellano. And he was a photojournalist back in the day in the 80s for the New York Post. He covered the Beatles. That's how long this guy's been around, right? And he's a really trusted and trusting man. And he toured with Menudo and ended up being their merch distributor. A very, very savvy business guy, very smart. And that's a very interesting sort of side narrative here about how successful the merch was in New York. Right. Really fascinating. And he shares through interviews that some of the boys confided in him about the abuse in the later years of Menudo. And at one point he was so fed up and pissed off, absolutely righteously so, that he went to the authorities on the boys' behalf. But then many of them understandably backed out. They were so scared. He goes to the police in Puerto Rico, but claims that the police were friends with Diaz. And so nothing happened. Interestingly enough, that's not just a claim.
No.
They very clearly map out that Diaz ran Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
He had influence in every level, except, I would say, the two female Puerto Rican TV hosts.
I know.
That were like, we don't give a shit about who has the power. We're going to talk about this.
Yes.
And I wish that they had given more credence and credo to them for being so brave to bring these shows on.
Yeah.
Diaz spoke out publicly at the time, and he refuted all the abuse allegations and would say that the boys are troubled, which is, of course, classic victim blaming.
Right.
And then it's all due to their emotional problems of growing up, and it's all due to the pressure that their parents put on them.
Oh.
Total bullshit.
Oh, not the
Total
pressure
bullshit.
of being like mega stars and what he's putting them under.
Right.
The parents, of course. Yeah, it goes into this total media frenzy really in Puerto Rico at the time. And like you said, because of these talk shows, which were essentially like the Oprah and Sally Jesse Raphael of the time, like
absolute perfect
Christina
analogy.
And
yeah.
I forget what the other one was, but Bolivar goes on one of these talk shows to talk about this, to bring it to light in the one arena that's going to listen to him. And the cops show up at the show, like in the middle of this taping. She's like, oh, the police are here and they want to arrest you because Diaz called the police and said, oh, he's bad mouthing me on television right now. It was crazy. So crazy. So they don't end up arresting him that day, but they do end up getting an arrest warrant for him. And he's eventually found guilty of defamation and has to publicly apologize to Diaz, like take out a newspaper ad.
But we don't know if he ever, I'm not sure if he did have to take it out. Like that was what they were going to make him do, but we don't know if he ever did it.
Yeah, they were going to make him do a laundry list of things.
Like 2 pages of the newspaper. He was going to have to pay for it and apologize.
Yeah. So at that point, it gets really weird. And that's when a lot of the boys start pulling out and like, yeah, we just like can't bring any more of this heat onto us. And then there's another female journalist in Puerto Rico who tries investigating the case. And she had done a several part series on it. And her final part never gets published and she's just fired all of a sudden. So it really seemed like an uphill battle because of that, as well as like these wider cultural reasons that the documentary touches on a little bit. Menudo was really this incredible source of pride for the country that they really hadn't had in an entertainment icon, or certainly something of this nature, like an 80s boy band, which was just everything in America. So they had their own version of that. And really the public just didn't want to believe it. Like, why would you want something like that tainted, using that term lightly, with these taboo topics like abuse and men abusing boys? And what does that mean in terms of sexuality and shame on the family? And again, gender roles. It was a perfect storm of not being ready to hear these victim stories and believe them.
Yeah. I think the cultural machismo would not wasn't going to allow it at all. There was just so much shame on all these different levels. But the audacity of Diaz just continue. Like they do a great job of, he's a dirtbag from the beginning, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And an example has to do with Ray Reyes, who is another Menudo member. And he had agreed and planned on coming forward about the abuse, but he died in 2021 at age 51. and a lot of people show up because Ray was beloved, very well known, and Diaz shows up to his memorial. I mean, just really, to me, clear, that's so much the mark of a narcopath. Like, just the idea, so much narcissism that I've got the control of this narrative. Nobody's ever going to believe it. I'm going to show up and be magnanimous. And he gets confronted, which is great. There are people asking him about the allegations and he's taken off for his car. But Roy, our lead, is visiting with Ray's brother. He was really tight with Ray and they were confidants to each other. And Ray's brother was supposed to be the next boy added to Menudo, but Roy took his place. And there's some very valuable information that comes out at this time. Ray's brother, Raul, shares with Roy during these conversations that his brother said, you don't want to come into this. It's not what you think.
Yeah.
It was all starting to come apart with some of these kids. And they were telling people they knew that they were in a bind. A lot of them were supporting their families financially by this time, which I think was another technique that Diaz was using, is finding kids of a certain level of income that he knew this is going to be the pattern. Their money is going to lift the family out of poverty, or at least lift them to the next level. And then they've got to keep producing, right?
Yep, absolutely. Totally reliant on him.
So then we move on to episode 3. And in this episode, you learn a lot more about Roy's abuse at the hands of both Diaz and now Jose Menendez. And the connection about this series of events is the potential for Eric and Lyle to get a new appeal regarding their life sentence based on the fact that now there's corroborating evidence that their father, Jose Menendez, was a serial abuser of young men, or boys, basically. But first, Roy continues to wrangle up potential witnesses. And I don't mean wrangle in a negative connotation. I mean, he's just trying to find, is this the time? Will people come forward now?
Right. Yeah. So they do at the top mention another former Menudo member who's not interviewed in this, but there's some footage of when he was still young. He goes on one of these talk shows. I mean, you're like, how many episodes?
How brave is he?
Yeah. Oh, and how brave was he? He and his dad went on there and he was like, I saw Diaz and a boy having sex in a room on one occasion. Like he goes to knock and like ask a question, and this is what he sees.
Yeah.
And
eyewitness.
Yeah. No criminal charges come from that. And again, like they're just on a talk show, but nobody is like, hey, maybe we should investigate this. There's more people on this talk show talking about this. Nada. So then Roy goes and meets with an older gentleman named Papo Gailey, and he is an older musician that toured with Menudo during the time. He was like the guitar player in the band, so older than all of the other boys. And this was after Roy had left. Like they talk about how their sort of Menudo generations were a little off. So Roy was not in the group at the time that Papo was there, but Papo has his own stories about things that he was suspicious of, where he says that Diaz always had a boy in his room. When they were on tour, he tells of an incident where there came some information about Diaz abusing 2 boys, where the information got so well known that the parents found out. This is what he's alluding to, right? Like the parents found out, the parents were brought in, and there was some money exchange, talking about the parents being paid off, as well as promises of perpetuating solo careers for these boys. And now all of a sudden, these boys' parents were allowed to be a little bit more present on tour, because that's also something he would do, like not allow them to be around. And of course, like there's always an excuse, right? Like, oh, it's going to distract them, or they need to be focused, and then we can't pay for all these rooms. All of a sudden, they were allowed to be there. So you get this understanding that these parents were like, okay, we found out about the abuse, but you're going to pay us off and you're not going to abuse our kid anymore because we're going to be there to watch it. And then that's just kind of swept under the carpet.
Well, I think people probably have, all of us as audience members can have a real reaction to that. I would encourage people, if you want to see a media presentation of a scene between 2 phenomenal actors in a fictional version of a similar incident, is in the movie Doubt, where it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, Meryl Streep, and Viola Davis. So there's the rumor that Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is abusing altar boys as a priest. And this hardcore nun, Meryl Streep, is suspicious of him based on what another nun has observed, Amy Adams. But the whole idea is that there's doubt. Like, yes, he's kind of creepy, but we don't really know. And there's a scene where Meryl Streep goes to Viola Davis, who is the mother of one of these alleged victims. And she's trying to say, you need to come forward. You got to do this. And Viola Davis is in this horrible position, knowing that it may very well be happening, but this scholarship is the only thing that's going to get her son out of the life that they have. And so as an audience member, it's an incredibly powerful narrative, because it's very easy for us on the outside of this to think that we would do what is quote unquote moral and right. And you just don't know. You don't know when you're in that position. We don't know what these parents, and maybe they thought, well, okay, some damages have been done, but we're going to guard our kids now.
Right. Right.
And we're going to keep an eye on you. Not understanding, though, that they don't understand that this is a serial predator who has many ways of abusing, if not your children, it's going to be somebody else's. So
yeah. And maybe the compensation we're getting is more that we would ever get in, the criminal justice system there or something. No, for sure. We don't know. I think it's very little information, because we're talking about somebody who kind of saw this from very far away and or maybe just heard about it trickling through.
Yeah.
But he does talk about, we've talked about the sexual abuse, but he talks about witnessing horrific verbal abuse to these boys.
Yeah.
Horrible humiliation by Diaz, to where he was just like, man, like I warned people just to stay off his bad side, but also, as much as you can, like stay away from him. But you get this feeling that he kind of knew that he and the older band members were sort of safe. Like, that's what I got. Like, we're probably not his preferred age range, and we're practically men at this point. So,
but that's also a great point to bring up, is that that's what trauma does to you. Trauma absolutely changes the way you think and the way you process information. Well, okay, here's a status quo that is manageable for me at this time.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's easy and you would hear people on the outside not understanding that, being completely judgmental, when you just don't understand that, like, it's not just black and white, moral, right and wrong. I'm able to make this decision. This is a horrific position for these young people to be in. Yeah.
Yeah. So Roy gets yet another person that says, hey, I'm willing to testify about what I know. It's the truth. I have no problem doing that now, which is great. Roy then talks about, they segue into some of the verbal and physical abuse as well that he alleges against Diaz, where I don't know why this was so heartbreaking for me, but he talks about this one incident where the boys are on an American TV show, talk show.
And that's another, I don't know if you noticed that too.
I didn't notice.
He was on Merv Griffin, and Merv Griffin has...
Oh, was that Merv Griffin?
has quite the reputation as well.
So maybe, help me put this into context then. But he talks about they're on the show to do a performance, and afterwards, he goes up to do an interview. And the way he's like, well, let me talk to one that looks like he speaks English. It's just,
God, I know. So gross.
Gross. So he goes up to Roy, who does not speak English well at all, and is basically starting to ask him questions. And Roy just has this like plastered performer smile on his face. This,
It's a Cindy Brady moment. It's that episode from the Brady Bunch where Cindy freezes because they're on television.
Yeah. And he's saying in his interviews as an adult today, like, I was so nervous. Here you have this audience of like screaming girls, and I'm just trying to do the best I can. And Merv Griffin's like, hello, like waving his hand in front of his face. Like, are you even is anything going on in there? And it's just a horrible depiction of like, he doesn't speak your language. What is going on?
Well, he also looks terrified. I mean, his eyes, he's got, like you said, he's got his smile plaster on his face.
Yeah, yeah.
His eyes have a, raised eyebrows, kind of a bright affect. But the tone in his eyes is just terror, terror.
Yes, yes. So after that incident, adult Roy tells us that Diaz was just livid about this representation on television, where he takes him back to the room, like punching him, kicking him, and then tells him, you're going to sleep in the bathroom naked tonight. Not even a towel, nothing to cover him. And basically, along with that, he raped him throughout the night.
No,
And
the following morning, he let him out at, I think, 7 in the morning and then just brutally raped him.
got it. Got it. So he, it's toggling back and forth between this footage. So you see, like you said, the terror in this boy's
Yeah.
eyes of the moment, but also probably what he knows is to come. Like, oh boy, I fucked up. Like, how am I going to be punished for this? Just heartbreaking.
There's also some additional interview there. And again, trigger warning, where Roy shares the physical ramifications of being raped physically as harshly as he did during that episode, and the dismissiveness, like he's bleeding as he's showering, he's trying to clean up, and Diaz's response is like, oh, you'll be ready again in a week. It's fine, you'll heal. Just horrible treatment. So now in this episode, we're at the point where Roy finally meets up with Robert Rand. That's the journalist that had been covering the Menendez case all this year. So this is where we get the story about what really happened with Jose Menendez abusing Roy. So really the first time now that we're tying the whole story together. And it talks about the first time that Roy met Jose in New York. Menudo was performing in NYC. Roy is taken to the Menendez house in New Jersey after being told by Diaz that Roy, was going to, quote unquote, do something great for Menudo, a favor. It has no idea what it's about, but probably already is feeling some dread knowing what he knows. So Roy gets in the limo with these men, and he describes Jose Menendez turning his head and looking at him with an expression like he wanted to devour him. Ugh. Diaz takes 13-year-old Roy to the Menendez house for dinner. He describes seeing Eric and Lyle at the house, and he uses some very particular language here that's fascinating to me. He talks about the house having a vibe, having an energy, a very heavy sadness that made him feel sick. And he even said it was the sadness of abuse. And by that time, I was very, very aware of what it was that I was seeing. I had felt it myself. I'm seeing it now.
He was tuned right into that.
Absolutely. And he goes on to report that Jose offered him wine. Well, didn't really offer it. He served him, and he told him to drink it all. This is very expensive, the wine that I poured for you. You need to drink all of it. And he said that immediately he felt heavy and tired, and basically he was incapacitated after drinking that glass of wine, and he had no control over his body. He starts to black out, and he remembers bits and pieces of walking down a hallway, being physically pushed and guided up a flight of stairs, or you know what, I don't know if he says about a stairs, but they use an image of stairs as if, so want to be very clear that that's the imagery they use. It was not necessarily stated in case this ever becomes part of a trial. Dr. Scott said this, blah, blah, blah. But he does report that he had no control over his body, and he knows that he was carried to a bedroom, but then he woke up back at the hotel the next day with no memory. So clearly had been roofied with something combined with alcohol. And again, he brutally raped because he's recognizing the extent of his injuries. And again, just dealing with the lasting pain. And miraculously enough, the contract with RCA was signed almost immediately after that.
It's so sickening.
Really, really sad and gross.
Gosh. So we do get some audio from Eric Menendez corroborating this memory of probably like meeting Roy. He's like, well, we met lots of them because we went to the concerts and backstage and stuff, but also saying, yes, boys from Menudo would come over to the house, like meaning multiples, not just this one occasion where, it was Roy, but he has a vivid memory of this. And then we get to hear from Roy about when he first learned of the murder of Jose and Kitty. And he says immediately, like, I understood that rage and that hatred. And he says, the first time Diaz raped me, I wanted to kill him too. And he just talks about like, your soul is just gone. It's very first person language of talking about how this makes you feel and how it would have you entertain doing actions that you wouldn't normally do. There's also a scene around this point where Robert Rand has calls Eric at the correctional facility, has him on speakerphone in the car, and is telling him, like, look, Roy has come forward. He talks about being at the house this night and being abused by your father. And I thought it was really poignant because Robert asks Eric, well, like, how does it make you feel to hear that? And there's a thoughtful pause on the phone, and Eric says, I feel horrible. And he goes on to articulate really, the fact that he has to now wrap his head around that there is now proof that other boys had been victimized by his father. It wasn't like, oh, great, that means we can get an appeal. It's just complete empathy for other victims out there. And you can just hear how, he's sort of reliving what he's had to go through with his dad, and now knowing that it wasn't just him and his brother.
Yeah, I never really, the Menendez case, I'm probably more interested in it now than I ever have been, for a number of reasons. And the brief interactions with Eric on the phone are very interesting to me. Of course, depending on what your perspective is, you can interpret things a lot of different ways. Like if I allowed myself to be completely cynical, I would think, boy, that's really smart the way he's reacting. He's very slow, very thoughtful. He's portraying he and his brother as having to find peace where they are in order to have any kind of quality of life and assure other people that they're okay. And you can take a cynical approach. I got to tell you, having worked in a prison and my own anecdotal experience with extended acquaintances who are incarcerated, that cynicism doesn't bear out. That is when somebody presents that way and doesn't deny, doesn't minimize, but is able to thoughtfully respond, that says a lot to me. Again, that's me stepping outside my clinical acumen. I'm just saying experiential, anecdotally, that was significant to me as well.
Well, and we never know how any of these are cut and
exactly
edited, and who they could have rehearsed this 20,000 times. I don't know.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. And that's very, very important to point out. But Robert goes to the brother's attorney with this new info. So Cliff Gardner, who had previously argued abuse of discretion in the second trial for the sexual abuse info not being allowed, all those appeals at state and federal levels were completely shot down. The convictions were confirmed at that point. So this means, significantly, what that means is there are no appeals left.
Right.
It's like case closed. That's all done. And he reveals that as of now, with Roy's accounts of abuse by Jose, the last option is for the state habeas petition. And that means that they be able to present new evidence that would require the court to then grant relief, which means reverse that particular conviction. It has to be very strong evidence that meets that high standard. I found it very, very interesting that the end of this series is quite abrupt. Like, it shuts down really quickly. We don't hear from anybody else. I actually take that as a good sign. I could be wrong, but I think that they're probably gathering at this point, 30 years on, 25 years on, there's a lot of people probably now more willing to come forward.
Sure. Yeah. I do want to, in my wrap up, I want to talk about how that kind of leaves us feeling. But they do show Roy going to one more person that he's asking essentially if they'll be willing to testify if he needs them to. And this is a man named Ash.
How great is he?
Oh my God. Like, I just want to go to his house and say, can I hang out here and just chill for like an hour and get a reboot? He's also a former Menudo member. And he was there, like 14 years after Menudo was a thing, like much later generation and after Roy. And he has always supported his fellow band members. He actually went and was an audience member when some of these talk shows were happening back in Puerto Rico. But yeah, he confirms like, oh yeah, like we used to talk about you and Diaz, like the rumors were that you guys were in an actual relationship. Like this was a thing that people knew about. And then, as this adult, he's like, well, that can't be a fucking thing. Like you're a child. There's no relationship to be had here. But he talks about Diaz just being a professional groomer. He says he groomed the kids, he groomed the parents, he groomed the media, he groomed the country, he groomed everybody. And he recounts an incident where he and his roommate were in their hotel room. He goes in to take a shower. He thinks he hears someone come in and comes out, and he's just like grabbing his clothes and stuff and has his back turned. And all of a sudden he feels someone behind him with the breath on the back of the neck and an erection, and he turns around. It's Diaz, and basically tells him, no, like, you are not going to try this with me, and sets his boundary very, very firmly. And then Diaz immediately, he says the gaslighting started, like,
Yep.
oh, well, what do you mean? But, so yeah, I mean, Ash is just such a gentle soul. And it was so sweet to see the interaction between him and Roy. And it's like he had every perfect word to support Roy in this space, two people who hadn't worked together in Menudo. And when he says, I'm here to support you, whatever you need. And you just, every time someone says that to Roy, you get this like relief of like, oh, thank goodness I'm putting myself out there and people are stepping up.
Well, that's an important revelation, because this was probably maybe it wasn't the only time that anybody had ever drawn a boundary with Diaz, but this is the one that we know of, and he's sharing his story. And you also get the impression, even in the limited time that you meet him, that Ash has seen some shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just came away like, this guy has been on a journey. He's been up, he's been down, and, he's landed in a really good place for himself because he is so present for Roy. He is reassuring, he's encouraging, and he's validating his experience, which is so important. And, one of the things also that you realize about Roy, or that he shares, is that this whole journey away from his depression, from his self-loathing, from his sense of doubt, from his suicidality, was through religion. And he's evangelical, and he's an evangelical minister. He travels around the world.
Yeah.
As a minister. And you get the sense with Ash that Ash is a very spiritual individual, but definitely not of that same belief system. And yet he is still there for him. And I thought that was really lovely. I really liked that.
I agree.
So now coming up, the next segment is Roy's about to go to the LAPD because of an incident that happened to him at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. He and Ray snuck out to meet a couple of girls that they really liked, that were their age, that they met at a concert or around a concert. Somehow they were able to get another room that was separate from their own rooms to hang out with the girls. And Diaz finds out, he slaps Ray, and then he drags Roy back to his room and told them that he was going to teach him a lesson because he belonged to him and that he would never be with a girl again. Like very broad statements. He ties him up, he tortures him, and again rapes him. And then acts like nothing happened, gives him words of affirmation. You're okay, blah, blah, blah. Total gaslighting. I
love you. Yeah.
I love you. I adore you.
Right.
Really disgusting language to use in this situation. But now we're watching Roy go to LAPD and meet with a victim advocate to make his report on November 8th. 2022, one of the few rainy days we have here
I noticed
in
that
Southern
too.
California. I was like, oh, wow, it was raining in LA on that day. I remember that.
Yeah.
And then we're left with the attorney getting his case ready to support Roy in this endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah. And so after this documentary came out in May of 2023, all the news outlets confirm with LAPD that the investigation is underway, 6 months or so after him going in and making this initial report at the station. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting way to end a documentary.
Yeah. Like I said, I felt like it was abrupt. I came away hoping, right, that there's going to be significant movement. I know that there's a lot of obstacles in getting people to come forward, especially after all this time. Like we've touched about before, shame, deals that involve family members. There may even be some NDAs that were signed. Who knows? As he got more savvy over the years, maybe he had NDAs done. I do still hope that more victims come forward because there's just got to be, it's clear there's many, many more.
Oh, I'm sure.
It wasn't just members of the band over the decades. It was also the kids that were auditioning. I was going to use the name of a very famous director who was known for having pool parties. I'm not going to use his name, but it feels eerily creepy to, another example of someone that was just entertaining boys that looked very adolescent for a long, and got away with it for a long time. So in reviews to how this is playing in the media, I think actually probably this is going to gain some traction. I think as more people listen to it, more people watch it, and as they continue to do more investigation and reaching out to people around the world by this point, for corroboration. I think we're going to be hearing more about it. But Rotten Tomatoes, again, doesn't have a lot to share. They do post several reviews. There's a section of one that I think bears repeating. I think it's very interesting. This is entertainment critic Nick Shager of the Daily Beast. And in his opening paragraph, he says, regarding the Menendez brothers, their father was a child molester. He was a sexual predator. And he's quoting Roy in the documentary about Jose at the outset of Menendez and Menudo, Boys Betrayed, thereby supporting Lyle and Eric's story about the cruelty they suffered at their dad's hands. This comes as explosive news to journalist and author Robert Rand and his colleague Neri Inclin, who had spent years working to exonerate the Menendez brothers because they're convinced that the siblings were wrongly convicted of first-degree murder rather than manslaughter, which would have saddled them with a lighter prison sentence.
Yeah, so Shagar goes on to say, quote, Peacock's docuseries basically assumes that same viewpoint, sometimes to a fault, skimming past discussions of the prosecution's case against Lyle and Eric, other than to say that they were portrayed by the district attorney as greedy rich kids, in order to avoid addressing any complicating or less flattering details, and to guarantee that they come across as railroaded innocence.
So I just thought that it was important to include this, but maybe not to diminish my desire to know more about this. I thought that was a very pointed perspective that he had, that Shager had, and to a cursory review of that statement, it seems pretty objective on first glance, but it also illustrates how reviews or commentators can unknowingly be hamstrung by their own ignorance in the bigger picture of sexual abuse, child abuse, trauma response. By saying this, I just offering a clinical observation that traumatized people can act in ways that are surprising, that are culturally unsavory, that are politically unsavory because of their trauma. Right. So, that's something that I don't think that Shager, I get why he's saying what he's saying, but yeah, part of being a teenager is being an asshole a bit.
We've all been there.
And many times part of being an asshole has to do with a level of experienced trauma.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of stats on this. That's why we have, diagnoses that point out behavioral disorders and behavioral presentation that is very much, in fact, due to the level of traumatization that a child experiences.
See, that's why they needed to talk to Dr. Rebecca more in this thing.
I know.
But that's also what we're here for. If people want all of that stuff, I guess. Again, like my interest has been more recent in this case than ever before. But I wonder if Lyle and Eric had just called the police on themselves that night and said, they did what they did, how that would have gone.
That's a good question.
Without the because the aftermath was clearly like, oh, fuck, like we really did this. And just going into self-preservation mode. And that didn't work out great. And it actually, obviously was just contributing to what was used against them in trial. But
right. So this gets into that issue about planning and intent, right? It's because what we want to do is we want to say, well, there was planning involved. So clearly they weren't so traumatized to the extent that they weren't able to plan this horrible crime. When in reality, it's no, planning can emerge pretty quickly.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So many factors to this.
Yeah.
But what did you think overall of the documentary? No, because we could talk about the Menendez now. We may have to do another episode on them. But what did you think about the doc?
I thought it was very well done in terms of documenting a victim's journey. And I'm talking about Roy on his terms, right? We've talked so many times about how grossed out we are about the lack of consideration given to victims. And this felt like I didn't feel that it was exploitative to him or that I shouldn't be watching it. Like this really considered what he wanted. I thought it was a great mix of going back and forth to the relevance to the Menendez case. I like that felt secondary and gave more worth, if you will, to Roy's story rather than making it feel like, he had to hang on to the coattails of this more salacious story. Back and forths can be tricky and it can be exhausting in some stories. And so I thought this was done pretty well. This is a classic illustration of a pedophile placing themselves in position of authority and accessibility to child victims in which we don't typically see, where it's a person of power, all the cultural aspects. I thought they probably could have fleshed that out a little bit more, but you get the idea of just how he was able to threaten and manipulate and pull the wool over people's eyes. So I thought it was a good illustration of that. And overall, I think, yes, it stops abruptly, but I think it leaves you with a feeling that something positive is going to happen and come of this, whether it's justice for Roy against Diaz or Lyle and Eric getting another chance at freedom after serving their very lengthy sentence. So I like the abrupt, ooh, let's wait and see what's next. And what comes from this documentary, like other victims coming forward, I think it just leaves me with a sense of hope, which a lot of these don't. So yeah, I'm gonna go 4 brains for this one. What about you?
Very good point. Well, I'm gonna start out with just saying it's definitely 4 brains for me. Although I struggled with some of the aspects of the creative construction and narrative formatting. I like the back and forth, as well as how that serves to reinforce some of the narrative elements, especially with so many individuals playing a part in this. It's really important to pick out structurally for the story players that are willing to participate, that have a verifiable story, that can present well.
Sure.
And that are necessary to that narrative. What I wasn't expecting, like I referred to earlier, is I was not expecting to significantly shift my perspective on the Menendez brothers. This was a big shift for me. And now I'm not saying, I'm wholesale signing off on it, but I'm more interested to come back and look at this with a more in-depth view of what went down. And also sort of, judging like with a more critical eye how I absorbed the media presentations of it at the time.
Yeah.
With like, John Malkovich and Rob, what's his face from Saturday Night Live.
God, I went back and watched that.
They made it into a skit.
Ugh.
It's like, boy, some of those things just really, and I'm a huge SNL fan, but man, some of that stuff does not age well at all. Critique. I do have a couple of critiques. There really was too much reiteration. This could have been done in either 2 episodes of exactly the same length or 3 shorter episodes. In fact, I would have liked 3 shorter episodes because there's definitely an arc that's important, but it was too long of episodes to be 3. I don't know why they didn't use more footage from the psychologist. I think that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
Finally, this is very important for anybody that's listening to us and thinking about watching it. This is not an easy documentary to watch, and not necessarily for the allegations of abuse. It's literally not something that you can have playing in the background while you're scrolling on the phone or playing Uno, as I do in some of our other documentaries, because the vast majority of it is in Spanish with subtitles. And this is no judgment against doing that. I think that having it in Spanish serves an incredibly important point that nobody talks about. It is vital for ESL speakers to understand that the language barrier here is not because of the interviewee's lack of facility with the English language, but rather that they're discussing highly emotional and particularly traumatic events. And it is vital that individuals be afforded the opportunity to discuss these types of events and this type of emotionally loaded experience in their own native language, so that it not only affords them like a bit more comfort in being able to express, but the ability to have a higher level of facility to verbally express themselves. It was just necessary and valuable. I was schooled on this years ago when a colleague of mine who is, wonderful, wonderful English speaker, but also speaks 2 other languages, but he was not doing well in interviews for internship programs until he was interviewed in Spanish. And he came away crying, saying, I can't believe the difference I felt being able to interview in Spanish rather than what I've had to do for all these years. And that stuck with me. That was a valuable experience for me. And I immediately thought of that as I was watching these episodes.
No, that's a great point. I mean, just to, as a viewer, how hard this is for somebody to talk about. And you kind of have that yearning to want them to be as comfortable as possible, when they're talking about this. And that's such a valuable layer to add to this. I think. Thank you for bringing that up.
All right. Well, we highly recommend watching it.
Yep.
I really highly recommend. I really think, well, I don't know if I what I do is I hope that something comes from this. I get pain is horrible, and the one not wanting to relive those things is so vital to some people. But I think that there would be a lot of support for any victims to come forward. I think that there would be there's a different tone in today's culture where, we're finally coming to grips with the profound, insidious nature of child abuse. And this would be a really great platform for victims to come forward.
Agreed. We will stay tuned, and maybe we'll reach out to Dr. Rebecca Bailey to come on a live stream.
Let's do it. I would love that.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us on another documentary review, and we will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawlspace Media Network in partnership with Glassbox Media. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
The LA Not So Confidential theme, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license, and you can check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube. All
of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on Twitter at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Please join us each month on Saturdays at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for a live streaming and very interactive broadcast on YouTube entitled Behind the Couch. Stay tuned to all of our social media for our live streaming scheduling announcements.
Subscribe to LA Not So Confidential so you never miss a new episode. And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, and you'll be the first notified about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag coming your way.
Thanks for listening, and join in with us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, folks.